on the slogans, we are here and they are there. And I must admit, I hated the slogan. I hated the slogan. I mean, this was not my idea. I mean, I believe in peace because I'm selfish, I admit. It's not because of the Arab cause. But I also understand that if the Arabs suffer, if the Palestinians suffer, then we will suffer too. I mean, so it is interdependency. So we need good neighbors who are happy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Wilson Center. I don't know if Sandy Berger is here. Is Sandy Berger here? Well, we're hoping he may come. Former National Security Advisor, dear friend Sandy Berger. I also want to recognize our former board chair for 11 years, Joe Gildenhorn and Alma Gildenhorn. It's, in case anyone has missed it, this event is sponsored by the Middle East Program's Joseph and Alma Gildenhorn Middle East Program. What a coincidence. The name of the program is your name. And we really cannot thank you enough forever and ever and ever for what you have done and do for the Wilson Center. Yeah. It's also a pleasure to introduce today a pair of dedicated peacemakers. Former Israeli Minister of Justice, Yossi Beilin, who doesn't know Yossi Beilin, and the Wilson Center's own, he's not always a peacemaker, with respect to Israel he is. In life, the Wilson Center's own Vice President for New Initiatives, Aaron Miller. Both are veterans of the Oslo process, both know Israel about as well as anyone. Their conversation kicks off this series of talks that we'll be holding in the run-up to the Israeli elections this March. The Wilson Center is strictly nonpartisan. I hope you all remember that, at home and abroad. So I will make no partisan comments about the Israeli elections, but I, as a passionate admirer of Israel, someone who goes there regularly and who really cares that Israel's future as a pluralist Jewish democracy is realized, I would just say keeping Israel, keeping bipartisan support for Israel in the United States is key. I attended the Munich Security Conference this past weekend. I was telling Yossi about all the Israelis that I met, and there was a lot of talk about a unity government coming out of the Israeli elections. Of course, we don't know who's going to win the Israeli elections, but free advice from me is that a unity government would be a very good thing for Israel and a very good thing for Israel's perception in the world, and a very good thing for Israel's relationship with the United States. I was on the White House lawn when President Clinton met with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat in 1993. I was a newly elected member of Congress. I watched it. I watched the handshake, and I thought we had turned the corner. I was also in Ramallah with President Clinton and Hillary Clinton in 1998 when the Palestinians eliminated the clause in their charter calling for the annihilation of Israel. I watched, it was an enormously moving ceremony, and I thought we had turned the corner again. Today, Yossi will offer his perspective on the election and the prospects of peace. Again, he was an initiator of the Oslo process and the Geneva Initiative, served the governments of Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Ehud Barak, and he has an incredible record of service. So I hope that Yossi and others who believe as passionately as I do and you do in a two-state solution will be able to persuade the next government to redouble efforts toward peace. And I hope that Aaron Miller, who's magnificent at moderating conversations with world leaders, will do so again. Again, please welcome Yossi Beilin, and let me turn the proceedings over to Aaron Miller.
Jane, thanks so much. Yossi doesn't need an introduction, and I want to welcome him to the Wilson Center and Daniela. It's really an honor and pleasure to have you here. We've known each other for a very long time. You've become part and parcel of the political landscape in Israel, a prime mover an observer of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I'll only say on a personal note that your honesty and integrity and your capacity to find the balance between principle and pragmatism, which is really where effective policy ultimately resides, makes you, to this day, a truly indispensable resource. You also, Yossi, see the world the way it is, while not losing sight of the way you want it to be. The format here is going to be very simple. We're going to talk about 3 issues for a good portion of the hour, and then we'll get to your questions. Israeli politics and the elections, that will be the first segment. Second, the character, nature, and state of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And finally, the problem of the much too promised land and what is possible with respect to Israeli-Palestinian and Arab-Israeli peace. I'm going to pose an assumption, which you're free to agree or disagree with or use it as a point of departure for each of these areas. So let's begin with Israeli politics and the elections. If you read the Israeli press, primarily Haaretz, you would get the sense that this election is pivotal, that Israelis face, their nation, the state of Israel, faces a profound choice between a integrated Israel into the international community, a Jewish democratic Israel, at peace with itself and with its neighbors, or alternatively, the other vision, Israel as an outlier, even a pariah, and those words have been used by various Israeli commentators. So that's my first question, Yossi. Is that how you see this election? And how do you think many Israelis look at it?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation and for the introductions. By the way, Jane, I don't believe that a unity government is the best solution. I'm a veteran of unity governments. I was the cabinet secretary of the rotation government of Peres and Shamir. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. We were 98 members in the coalition out of 120. But we almost never have a majority in the parliament because everybody thought that the other was responsible for getting the majority. So why should they stay until late in the evening in order to vote? And I, as a cabinet of the secretary, had to go to the Knesset to beg members of the coalition to stay until there was a vote, because they really had no ambition and no challenge in serving in the Knesset. The government was the Knesset. And all the debates and the slogans were exchanged in the cabinet meetings rather than in the Knesset. And the hatred between Likud and Labour did not change because they sat in the same room. Even more so because they came to know each other. So it was such a deadlock, a built-in deadlock of a cabinet of inner cabinet of 5 and 5. The whole idea was that if you want to change something, you will never be able to do that. But if you want to keep the situation as is, the status quo, you will be able to keep it. And that's why, despite of the fact that we left Lebanon partially during these years, and we had an economic plan which saved Israel in '85, nevertheless, I believe that we should never have something like this again unless there is no other choice. It is the last resort. It cannot be the first one. I mean, if the left, the peace camp wants to go to peace, it cannot do that with the right. And if the right wants to whatever do, sometimes even to go to peace, it is easier for them to go on their own, like Begin with Egypt in 78, 79, rather than to go with the Labour Party or with a more center-left party, because then the responsibility is always on the moderate party. But if the right is on its own, it has to take steps like Sharon with Gaza. Not that I admire this step, but at least it was a step towards giving up of occupation. And I think that it was done because it was easier. It was easier for the, or I would say that it is perhaps the other way, more difficult for the right wing to lead very rightist policies when it is on its own. And this is why my recommendation would be, don't do it if you don't have to. Sometimes there is no other option, and then it's perhaps okay. Now, about the pivotal role of these elections, you know whether elections were pivotal only post factum. You don't know it in advance. We know by now that the 92 elections were pivotal. It's not necessarily that we knew in 92 that these elections would be very important. It is only if a new government takes bold steps this way or another that you can say these elections, you remember, they were very important. Before the elections, it is very natural for all of us to believe that it is pivotal because we hope for a change, actually on both sides of the political spectrum. So, of course, if there is a big change as a result of these elections, it will be pivotal. What is interesting, but perhaps not surprising, is that the reason for having early elections, I bet that you don't remember, I don't remember either. What was it a few months ago that Netanyahu decided to have early elections? He has a coalition. People did not leave him. But he felt uncertain in this coalition, so he decided to have early elections. People said it is a waste of money and of time and whatever. Why every 2 years to go to coalitions? Although it is not every 2 years, as you may know. The average is 3, but okay. And the result will be the same. Nonsense. The result won't be the same. Whatever the result is, it won't be the same. And already the decision to have early elections triggered very interesting developments. For example, you have a united Arab list. First time in history because of the higher threshold that we are having now. But the threshold, the technical step will have impact on the result because the United Arab List, although it includes people from different, very different parties, communist and ultra-religious or whatever, but the new joint list is already bigger than its components. So if the components are 11 together, in the polls they get 13. Because the Arabs, many of the Arabs are sick and tired of their own debates there, and they say, if there is a new party which goes together, all the Arabs, we will vote for them. And there will be a very nice turnout. And apparently this will be the case. So one of the changes is the Arab vote. One should follow it. Another one is the split in the Shas party, which is actually half and half or something like that, which is a very interesting development too. Some of the very permanent members of Knesset already left because they felt they perhaps had no chance to run again. So you already have a different picture of the Israeli politics before the elections. And so the elections might be pivotal. I personally hope that they will be pivotal. I'm not sure that this will be the case, but the changes have actually occurred.
We talked about this earlier, and both you and Daniela, I guess, question the premise as to whether Israel has the kinds of leaders willing and able to face up to the challenges that it confronts. Now, we all glorify and extol the giants of old, the Ben-Gurions, the Begins, the Rabins. Shimon is still quite active. Even Sharon. Israel's in a leadership transition. to a younger generation of prime ministers, frankly, Barack, Omer, Netanyahu, who don't seem to have the kind of legitimacy and authority to make the kinds of decisions. So the question is, how does a small state in a very turbulent neighborhood facing these challenges make decisions without leaders of real consequence? Leaders who are masters of their political houses, not constantly looking over their shoulders. Is that simply too naive? Where does the next generation of Israelis leaders come from, or do we see them now? They're here.
Well, first of all, both of us are very interested in the issue of leadership. You wrote about American leadership, and my doctoral thesis was about generations in politics. And I used to teach this issue in the university for many years. My very simplistic conclusion is that there are no differences between among the generations. You have good people, bad people, leaders, non-leaders in every generation. It is not a generational question whether you have leaders. Usually when you have such big leaders, as you mentioned, and others, it is because there were leaders in war. Most of the leaders in war are remembered because they had to take very, very tough decisions. And when the perception was that they made the right decisions, they were admired. But most of the people that you mentioned were so non-charismatic. You know, I was very close to Peres. The main question that they used to ask me, how come that the leader of the Labour Party is so uncharismatic? Can't you have somebody like Golda Meir, God forbid, you know, the worst of our prime ministers? But can't you have somebody like her? She was charismatic. Why? Because she looked like a grandmother and everybody was like a child when he saw her or she saw her. Rabin was charismatic. He was a shy person, a very shy person, almost apologizing for being in the room. The last thing that you could say about Rabin that he was charismatic, when they became older, I mean, Peres became very charismatic at the age of 80, 85. I mean, people wondered about the miracle of shaking his hand and listening to him and understanding that he's sharp and vivid and whatever. And suddenly he became charismatic. I mean, Ben-Gurion was a bureaucrat. He was uncharismatic as one could imagine. With his voice was awful. It was very, very short. He grew his hair in order to be distinguished, you know. That was the story. And people spoke about it, that the leader of the labor movement is so uncharismatic. There was Berl Katzenelson, Ade Gordon, others, but not him. And suddenly, because of the war, mainly because of the War of Independence, he became charismatic. But he was not born charismatic. The only one among these people who was born charismatic was Sharon. So, non-partisan as I can be, thank you for this charisma. Thank you for this charisma. I mean, charismatic, what does it mean? That people believe in the person despite of what he or she are doing. So he is charismatic. So what? Is he good? Is he bad? Charismatic? For what? This is why I'm not longing for a charismatic guy. For example, Bougie Herzog, who is running as the leader of the Labour Party, is non-charismatic as one could be. Thanks heaven. He's a normal person. You can talk to him, you can call him, you can criticize him, he's listening to you. I mean, and maybe in 30 years from now, he will become post factum very charismatic. But for the time being, thanks heaven. Thanks heaven. Somebody who is reasonable and you can talk to. So you have a problem with his voice, he's not tough enough, and these things. What does it have to do? It has to do with leadership. I mean, if this guy knows what to do, and how to implement things, which I believe is the case. So he's not going to sing in the opera just to be a prime minister. I'm not worried at all about the issue of leadership. It is not that during the years it is going down, and God forbid in 50 years there will be no reservoir of leaders in the world. The question is always who is becoming the leader. And we know that people who appear to be leaders, whose voice is a low one, and who are tall, and who seem people who know their way, can become easier leaders in every place. But sometimes they are also good leaders. In most of the cases, they are deceiving their voters. They seem to be people who know their way, and they don't know their way. And this is one of the problems of democracy. When you see people, what is happening in Israel, but also here. And in many ways, of course, we emulate you. You see somebody like Lapid, who appears on the TV and is sure of himself, and he asks the right questions, and he's a smart guy, you are sure that he can be the prime minister. Then you vote for him. The guy got 19 seats in the last 2 years ago. For a second, at the evening of the results of the elections, there was a possibility for him to become the prime minister when it was 60-60. Then it was 61 for Netanyahu and 59 for the center left. When he was asked if the numbers are as they seem to be, would you be the prime minister? He said, no, it's Bibi. Because, he came out of the TV. He had no idea what does it mean to be a prime minister. Then they made him a finance minister, which was even worse. The guy did not finish high school. He knew nothing in numbers. And the guy is the minister of finance. But people say, no, he looks nice. He asked the right questions. Why couldn't he be the prime minister? And you see these things here about potential candidates for president. Movie stars and whatever. And you see on your TV screen actors and politicians. And it looks at a certain moment like the same. Why he could not be or she could not be. And apparently it is a profession, and you have to know something about politics, about parliament, about government before you become a prime minister and whatever.
It is interesting, though, our last 5 presidents, compared to your last 5 prime ministers, it's a fundamental difference. Our last 5 presidents look like they could have walked out of a J. Crew catalog. Your last 5 prime ministers, and that's really fascinating to consider what the implications are of that for our politics and our media as opposed to yours. You have an incredibly intrusive 24/7 media, and so do we, and yet your prime ministerial candidates and your leaders, in terms of their physical personas, don't even begin to compare with the relatively tall, well-follicled presidential candidates and presidents that we continue to produce. It's actually quite interesting. But let's move to the second piece. I'm sure we can come back to in Q&A on the elections. The U.S.-Israeli relationship. We've had dysfunctional relationships between presidents and prime ministers before. Sadat and Begin and Carter, Bush 41 and Shamir, Netanyahu and Clinton. And yet in each of those cases, despite the dysfunction and the tension, and tensions were great. I observed firsthand 2 of the 3. It was productive, in part. Now you have dysfunction without production. And it's been ongoing now since at least 2009. So here's my question. What's wrong with the U.S.-Israeli relationship at the top? And is this a responsibility that is equally shared or shared to some degree on the part of the Prime Minister of Israel and the current president?
Well, I think that it is not by accident that all the prime ministers that you mentioned are coming from the Likud. And they promoted the idea of settlements. Now, here, sometimes there are presidents who are saying, well, we can understand the situation on the ground, we understand the fears of Israel, we have to help Israel because it is our ally, and we don't have too many democracies in the Middle East, and whatever. When it comes to the point of settlements, it is inconceivable. You cannot really try even to convince American presidents from the Republican Party, from the Democratic Party, that there is any sense of building new settlements or new houses in current settlements. Rabin tried this idea of political settlements and security settlements. Mm-hmm. Which was stupid. What is security settlements? Security for what? The kindergartens in the settlement will secure the kindergarten of our granddaughters in Tel Aviv. What is this? I mean, nobody bought it. But Rabin had to invent it in order to justify at least part of them. In the Likud, they say this is our policy, whether you like it or not. And in my view, this is the most important thing. If there is another government in Israel in a month, the first thing it should do is to freeze the settlements. Do we have a partner? Don't we have a partner? Can we have peace with Syria? Can't we have peace with Syria? With Abu Mazen? Is he strong? Is he weak? Does he really want? I don't know. I believe I know, but let's say I don't know. But to stop settlements? Before you say hello, you're elected, stop settlements. You don't do that, you confront the United States. And this is the situation. All the prime ministers who promoted settlements found themselves confronting the administration of the United States and both parties. I don't think that there are many Republicans who support the idea of settlements. Maybe some of them don't think that there are Democrats like that. Now, is it going to change once there is another prime minister? In 5 minutes. It's not something deep which will remain there, that even if there is a new prime minister in a month, then the administration will say, well, now we have a problem with Israel, not with you, and we cannot mend fences. The fences will be mended immediately. Now, does it mean that America is stopping the assistance to Israel? No way. Does it mean that there are no shared values? I mean, we are laughing about these shared values because you repeat this idea all the time, but it is true, there are shared values and they will remain. The problem is the personal relationship, which are based not only on the behavior, although this is part of it, but also on the beliefs. Now, where does it hurt? First of all, we Israelis do not have too many assets which are more important than our relationship with the United States. So to play a game with this relationship is irresponsible. But there is also something else. And the something else is the friendly relationship between the two personalities. The leader of the free world and the Israeli prime minister. This is not only for gossips. This is a real thing. The Israeli prime minister should know that the American president is available for him or for her. Always. Some of our prime minister took it too far in order to call the president every day. like Barack calling Clinton. And Clinton, from time to time, complained about it. But knowing that whenever you need the leader of the free world, he is there for you, is important strategically. And I'll give you only one example. About 3 years ago, the mob was on the Israeli embassy in Cairo. And the ambassador was not there. It was Friday. He was in Israel, but the staff was there and the security people were there. The Egyptians went to the floor of the embassy, knocked on the door. The staff went to a secured room, but the secured room was on the verge of not being secured anymore. And the ambassador called the president. The prime minister called the president and wanted the Americans to help us. And President Obama was very busy. He heard that Bibi was searching for him, and he took the call after some hours. They never told us whether it was a result of him really being so busy that he could not take it, or because it was Bibi, so he said, okay, I can wait. But the general feeling in Israel was that it was because of because of Bibi. And it was never denied. The feeling is that had it been Rabin or Peres, and he said, I need the president urgently, he would have answered him immediately. Now, thanks heaven, these things do not happen every day. And when both sides are saying that the relations were never so good, they are not lying. Because on the defense level, on whatever, the relations are good and as they were in the past. But in the top, they are awful. There is really hatred. Hatred. And even the spies and whatever. And this is bad for Israel, not only for the personalities. And I really hope that it will change.
Whether there's a reset on this one, I'm not sure. Usually in these instances, it requires the departure of one or both. And that, frankly, that will happen in terms of our president. It's arguable what's going to happen in terms of the current Israeli prime minister. At least within 20 months, it'll happen. All right, final question, Yossi, and then we'll go to the audience questions. Peace process, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. My own view right now is that the two-state solution is too hard to implement and yet too important to abandon, which puts us in a very awkward position. What could change that, in your view? What would be required to change that fairly pessimistic assessment? Too hard to implement, but too important to abandon. What would be required in order to actually create a new point of departure to implement a conflict-ending agreement between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, I must admit that I'm toying with something which has been hovering in the air for many years, and which in the past I did not attribute too much importance to it. And this is the idea of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation. I think that if there is such a confederation, then the idea of the two states will not be so, I would say, black and white. And I think that we were wrong in describing our dream as a divorce. There was a reason for that. People wanted to understand what is it that we really want. I mean, speaking about the peace camp, why do you love so much the Arabs that you want to give them a state as a present? Why are you so much for peace? And we had to defend ourselves. And we said, no, it is because we are selfish. We want a Jewish and democratic state. How are we going to have a democratic state if there is a majority of Palestinians in few years? And we don't want such a majority, because then you don't have the dream of a Jewish state. So the only way is to separate. The only way is to divorce. Namely, that actually a peace treaty between us and the Palestinians is a divorce. In 1999, we went to the elections when Barak was elected on the slogans, we are here and they are there. And I must admit, I hated the slogan. I hated the slogan. I mean, this was not my idea. I mean, I believe in peace because I'm selfish, I admit. It's not because of the Arab cause. But I also understand that if the Arabs suffer, if the Palestinians suffer, then we will suffer too. I mean, so it is interdependency. So we need good neighbors who are happy. But if you say something like that and you stress it too much, you look like the new Middle East of Shimon Peres. So the idea of divorce or of they are there and we are here was the counter argument, the answer of the peace camp to the sarcasm about the naivete of the new Middle East. And I was part of it by not revolting against it. And you know, people said, okay, if what you want is divorce, it is better. I mean, people accepted our slogans. I believe that we were wrong, because this was not exactly ourselves. And I think that the idea of a confederation can really solve the problem. We are speaking about I'm speaking about two totally sovereign states, independent states, two members of the UN and members of all the other organizations in the world, who are having some joint authorities and joint responsibilities. It is on water, infrastructure, planning, zoning, environment, and maybe other things too. And the two states will decide in the future what are the areas in which they want to work together and what are the areas in which they want to work separately. Now, in such a situation, one of the results might be that all those settlers who want to stay in their settlements will not be evacuated. For an Israeli prime minister, this is a key, because the biggest fear of the Israeli prime minister, from the right and from the left, when they speak about the two-state solution, is the moment in which they will have to evacuate hundreds of thousands of settlers from their places. Second generation, third generation. If you say to them, dear settlers, next Wednesday in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, we leave the West Bank. And we suggest to you very nice compensation. You want to leave? Be our guest. You don't want to leave? Remain there. It is much more reasonable to allow them to live there in a kind of a common confederation rather than if it is two different states. And you can, in an easier way, deal with another very problematic issue, which is security. If it is a confederation, the confederation might have also joint security forces, and not just a situation whereby one state has to host security forces of another state and whatever. So I'm thinking about it more and more. trying to talk about it with people, to write about it, and to see whether something like that is feasible. And if I may just tell you a story, can I tell you a story?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. In the midst of the negotiations in Oslo, I met with Faisal Husseini. Many of you knew this guy. He was the most important leader in Jerusalem, Palestinian leader in Jerusalem. And originally, the whole Oslo process had to be between him and myself. And eventually, and I will not get into it, it happened that it was neither me nor him. But I was in charge of the process in Israel, and he was not part of the process at all and did not know the details of what happened in Oslo. But he was also the head of their delegation to the steering committee of the multilateral talks on water, on refugees, on economic projects. And I was the head of of the Israeli delegation. And we met in Russia in
January 92.
No, January 92, I was not a deputy minister, so 93 maybe. But we met in Russia, and I asked him, what did he think about a confederation between the future of Palestine and Jordan? Because then, if you remember, all of us talked about a Jordanian-Palestinian confederation. This was the idea. And you know that although people said Oslo was the two-state solution, it was never the two-state solution because we never said in Oslo what would be the solution at all. So I asked him, what do you think about the Jordanian-Palestinian solution? He said, Yossi, do you really think that I'm an idiot? I said, no way, Faisal, I appreciate you and I know that you are not an idiot. So why do you suggest me this idea? I said, oh, well, I thought that there are so many Palestinians in Jordan and why not? You can be together in a confederation. I will not quote him now. But he said, if I have to choose between Jordan and a prosperous, democratic country, why should I not choose Israel? I said, Israel? What are you going to do with Israel? I mean, we are enemies. You know, I said that we are enemies because he always used to say, half jokingly, every time when we met, he said, I'm your enemy. And then we hugged and whatever. So I said, we are enemies. What do you mean? A confederation between the two of us? He said, this is the only solution. And you know, I did not buy it. But when I'm thinking about it, when I'm thinking about what happened to us all these years, and about the difficulties in the implementation of the future agreement, I think actually Faisal Husseini was not wrong. Was not wrong. I mean, we know the Palestinians much more than what we knew the Jordanians or the Egyptians or the Syrians. We are friendly with them. They work in Israel. We go to, or we went, and some of us are still going to the West Bank. It is possible to create a confederation, rather than to say, peace is divorce, and that's it. You will be there in your ghetto, we will be here in our ghetto, and we will never meet. It's idiotic. So my new idea, my new baby, is the confederation.
Okay. Questions, please, and make them questions, please. And please identify yourself. Yes.
My name is Herbert Grossman. I'm a retired judge. If you go back to the newspapers in 2004, the end of 2004 and beginning of 2005, there were two schools of thought about the withdrawal from Gaza. One said that all the Palestinians want is territory and there'll be peace, and the other side said all they want is strategic territory to make war. And so there were only those two sides. Of course, after the disengagement, there was basically an ongoing war, and the ones on the left who had said that there would be peace now said, well, it was the fault of the fact that it was unilateral and not pursuant to an engagement. Okay, now and some of them even said, oh, I said back then that that would be the case, but if you read the newspapers, you don't see that. You yourself waited until Sharon died to claim that you had told him that. But in any event, be that as it may, how do you account for the fact that the withdrawal from Area A and Area B was under an agreement, and it was your agreement? And the whole purpose of that agreement, the Oslo Agreement, was that the Palestinians would show that as they withdrew, there would be peace. And instead, you had first drive-by shootings, then bus bombings, and then you had the Intifada. So and I ask that because it's relevant to what you say now ought to be the disengagement from the West Bank and with
Yossi,
all the
how do you-
strategic
how do you-
territory. So how do you account,
respond to
in
that?
the theory on the left, the fact that there was an agreement and the worst...
We got the question.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Well, first of all, I do not believe that one can compare the unilateral step of Sharon and the agreement with the Palestinians or with the Jordanians or with the Egyptians, because agreements are agreements, and this was a non-agreement which did not expect peace, but Sharon believed that it would be more secure if we leave the Gaza Strip unilaterally, and he was wrong. I told him that. I wrote about it much before he died, and there is even a book of 33 interviews by Ari Shavit, who wrote it much before Sharon died, in which he interviewed different politicians in Israel about the withdrawal, and I said exactly what I said to him. But about the big question, why the interim agreement with the Palestinians was not implemented, while the permanent agreements with the Jordanians and the Egyptians, generally speaking, were implemented, is not necessarily because the Palestinians are worse than the Egyptians and the Jordanians. One is that it was not a permanent one. I believe that the biggest mistake in '93 was that rather than having a permanent agreement, then we went to an interim agreement of 5 years, which never ended. There was no reason not to go immediately for a permanent agreement. I believe that the situation to have, on the one hand, a Rabin who wanted very much to have peace, Yasser Arafat, who was in a weak period after the first Gulf War and thought that an agreement with Israel might save him, and President Clinton, who wanted very much both sides to make peace between them, was a unique situation, and that we missed the opportunity of doing then what we want to do now. But one has to remember what happened on our side. It is not only the Palestinian side. The big massacre was on our side, Baruch Goldstein. When 29 prayers in Hebron, Muslims were killed by him. And exactly 40 days after the 40 days after the death of these people, there were the two terrorist events by the Palestinians, one in Afula and one in Hedera. Not that it, God forbid, justifies anything, but we did not even imagine that an Israeli officer, a doctor, a religious person with a kippah, will kill 30 Palestinians. It was not on the radar. We couldn't understand that it happened to us. And then the period of terrorism and blood began. Now, they killed more, we killed less, whatever. We blame each other since then. But we cannot say that nothing happened on our side and that they breached all the agreements. You ask me, I believe that they breached more than us. So what? So what? And this is why I don't believe that if there is an agreement between both sides, it will not be implemented. Look at the situation today with the West Bank. The security coordination is much better than what we are speaking about, as you may know. We never had it with the Palestinians. It's like the security coordination that we have with Jordan. It's really unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, and there is there a leader with a suit, with a tie, who is blamed for being a terrorist because he is going to the international organizations and wants to be a member. You know, it's half a joke and half a dream. We always say that Arafat was the worst. He was unshaved, he was in uniform. He always said, you can all sink in Gaza, in the water of Gaza, whatever. And here you have the dream of your life as the partner. So from morning to night, you say, there is no partner, he is not our partner, he is going to the UN. Have an agreement with him, he will not go to the UN. And so I believe that no side is innocent in our story. No side is innocent. We made mistakes, and we were not prepared for our own enemies at home. We could not think about a Jew killing Rabin. I'm speaking about myself. Have anybody told me before November the 4th, 1995, that a Jew will kill our prime minister? I said, you are crazy. All of us believe that if there is such a situation, perhaps it will be a Hamasnik who will try to kill him. And we all the time, including myself, told him you have to be more careful and whatever, but not against Jews. And it happened. So once we make peace, I'm telling the future prime minister who will sign the peace treaty with the Palestinians, watch your back.
Yes.
Chris Bauman, National Defense University, and I worked on the most recent round of security cooperation between the two parties, and I have to say your idea about a confederation being there officially is one of the most promising and intelligent things I've heard in a long time about that. I was wondering, can you share more of your ideas about how the confederation would actually work in the security realm?
Well, the work on it is in diapers still, but there was a very interesting article by Sari Nusseibeh less than a year ago about the idea of confederation, and I must say that we are talking about it quite intensively. And the security coordination under the confederation is something that occupies his mind a lot. So the idea perhaps is to have some kind of a security force of the confederation besides the security forces, the security force of the militarized Palestinian state and the IDF. So what you are doing, you are creating a third party, a third body, which will have its own authorities. And these authorities, including in security, will evolve during the years. Or, God forbid, the two parties may decide that they are taking authorities from the joint body because it did not succeed. But it will be up to them. So in places like, for example, the old city in Jerusalem, such a confederation, the confederated security body may play a very important role. In such areas which are especially difficult, they might play a role. And there might be also another ingredient, which is a third party. In the Geneva Agreement initiative, we are speaking about the United States-led third-party security force. So if I refer to Geneva, one can add to it the idea of the confederation in the aspect of security, which will join the international force. Netanyahu, for example, is very much against it. He not about. I did not speak with him about the confederation, but I did speak about him with him about the international group or multinational group. We don't like to call it international because international is immediately the UN and multinational is kosher. So I'm speaking with him about the multinational force. And he always says, Yossi, you really believe that these people, I don't want to mention, will defend you? I believe that there is such a possibility. Barak was for it. Olmert was for it. I don't think that Sharon could have been supporting it. But this is an idea which I believe eventually will be implemented. And if you add to it the confederation, it might be very successful.
Yes.
My name is Stephen Shore. Is there any possibility of replacing the Israeli electoral system with 100 by dividing the country into 120 Knesset districts, or will there be a definitive peace agreement with the Palestinians before there is any change in the Israeli electoral process?
Why should we change it, by the way?
Well, you've changed it once before. It went from indirect to direct, and now you're back to indirect.
Yeah, I'm taking upon myself the honor of bringing it back to the indirect election of a prime minister, as it happens in every parliamentary regime. And I'm very much against dividing Israel to 120. Israel is small enough. And what might happen is that the regional interests will become more important than the general ones, which is, in my view, very, very problematic. And I must say to you, Ben-Gurion was the one who believed in dividing Israel into 120. In the 50s, he wanted to make out of it a major issue. Now, Bibi wanted to make out of the change of the system a major issue. He totally failed. Nobody is talking about changing the system. And his idea was that the party which gets more votes, the leader of the party who got more votes will be immediately the candidate for the prime ministership. This is something else, and maybe it is a good idea. I'm not in love with it. But and I'm not saying that our system is the best. Of course it is not, and you don't have best systems. Having a higher threshold was a good idea, for example. First past the post idea is problematic because sometimes a minority in the general vote can become a majority in the parliament, and this is not fair to the results of the elections. But for example, if I'm looking at the American system, and I'm seeing the paralysis in the American politics as a result of the fact that you have confrontational Congress before you. And all what you think about is how can you bypass the Congress in order to implement what you really believe in, because otherwise you have to resign. I mean, in Israel, in such a situation, you would have resigned because you don't have a majority in the parliament. Here, this is not even a question. Nobody is talking about it because you are the president and there is a division of authorities and whatever. But actually, you are paralyzed. In Israel, at least you are not paralyzed because you have always a Knesset which is representing the majority, and you are part of this majority. So we did not find in political science the best system, but we do know that all these systems have their downsides. And you can, I believe, fix here and there things like the threshold, but you should not really shake it. And I do not believe that we are suffering because of it, and that we cannot take decisions, and even bold decisions, because of the electoral system. But nevertheless, dividing the country into 120 regions, I believe, or constituencies, will be, I believe, a mistake.
I guess we've come to the end of the hour, but is that you, Tom Dine? What? Final question.
Hello, Yossi.
Hi.
You talked about a lack of leadership. It seems to me that Israel is showing world-class leadership in its business community. Highly educated, highly accomplished, and yet so few want to enter politics, want to display their capabilities, utilize their capabilities in the political arena. So why? Why don't they come in?
Tom, yesterday I met with a group of students in Maryland. And we spoke about the different political parties in Israel, and I referred to Ross Perot. Ross Perot? They said, whom do you mean? And
Clinton elected twice. Hey, that's leadership.
that's leadership. I admit it. But then I was reminded about my age, and I said, okay, I'll tell you a word about Ross Perot. I mean, sometimes it is a blessing that they are not part of politics. What are they saying? What did Ross Perot say? You remember. He said, I succeeded in business, I'll do the same in politics. Here is my chart, this is what I'm going to do. In 1 year, this will be the result. In 2 years, this is, in 3 years, this, and in the fourth years, you will get this. People said, oh, this is my man. He can do it. He did it already. He proved himself in business. So the next thing is he proved himself in politics, and it is more or less the same, right? We say sometimes, this guy, we would have never have him as the director general of a supermarket, right? This is usually what we say about unsuccessful politicians. So we need somebody like him. Now, it so happens that many people may succeed in business and fail in politics, mainly because they don't understand that it is a very different area. It is for professionals. And if somebody comes out of the blue, from the right, from the left, from the center, and believe that he can really emulate his success in TV, in the movies. Well, in the movies there is still a debate about Reagan, but I am not his admirer, I admit, but again, that you can really, or in the army. For years, people believed that if somebody was an officer in the army, he can be the best politician. Some of them were, some of them were not. But most of them who came to politics left politics almost immediately. And there is a kind of a pattern. In many cases, when a high officer is coming to politics, he says, I hate this politics, that you have to compromise and whatever. I am coming because I am an Israeli patriot. And the fact that I was elected on the ticket of Labour or Likud is secondary for me. I'm not here to debate about ideology from morning to night. I want things to be done. And I know how to execute. And then when they become politicians, they understand that you have values, and you have ideology, and you have a history of your party, and you may belong to the Socialist International or to the International Liberal Movement or whatever, which seems to you waste of time, old people who don't stop talking to each other about nonsense. But then you understand that there is something to it, that you cannot be an executive in politics with no connection to anything else. And that you have to be based on values. And it is not just lip service. And that people are ready to give their life to their values. It's very different. So, I mean, there are some businessmen, most of the businessmen who came to politics in Israel failed and left, even could not wait for the end of the term. You can take the richest person in Israel, who is a good friend of mine, Steph Wertheimer. When you speak about his biography, he said, about the Knesset, you don't have to mention it. He couldn't wait until the end of the 4 years. He was elected by Dash in 1977 and left before the end of the term because he didn't have patience to the debates all the time. But without debates, you don't have real politics. And you have to listen to the other and to understand maybe your opponent is saying something right. And it happens. People are always wondering, how come that a rightist and a leftist sit together in the cafeteria and are laughing to each other? On TV, they shout and scream, and in the cafeteria, they are laughing. Because this is part of the job. This is part of the job. And sometimes you put a bill with your opponent because you believe together that the most important things in the world is animals or something like that. You have this cooperation. This doesn't happen in the army. And I don't know about business enough to say that it happens there or not, but apparently not. Politics is different than many other areas in life, although it resembles life very much.
We've come to the end of the hour, so please join me in thanking you for a fascinating presentation. Yossi, thank you so much. Thank you.